Macaroni and cheese as a biohazard? Give me a break, this must be a Star Trek episode. Before we dive right into this episode, I'd like to explain my methods a little. I'll be thoroughly spoiling this episode. I'll also be making certain references to other works of fiction. I'll do my best to list the works I reference in the description box below. One of the first things I encountered while studying the background of this episode is that it wasn't originally written or intended as the Season 1 finale. Season 2's The 37s was supposed to be the finale and be formatted as a two-parter. I think the premise of the 37s is strong enough for a two-parter, but I also think they should have extended the Maquis integration problems from this episode well into Season 2. The concept of the Maquis in Star Trek was invented specifically for Voyager, and this very episode concludes most of the Maquis-related problems. I'll be honest, I find that disappointing. With all of that being said, the episode takes a decent stab at creating believable Maquis Starfleet problems. They tried to do something interesting, and I am always in favor of that. In fairness to the episode, it is from relatively early in the show's run. The opening of the episode takes us straight into Captain Janeway's holo-novel adventure, if you can call it that. I was always actively disinterested by the Janeway governess holo-novel thing for a few reasons, the first of which being that I'm pretty far removed from what one would call a similar situation. I'm also put off in this specific case because I don't speak Latin. I also don't recall this particular holo-novel having much of an impact on anything. Why exactly is Tuvok so short with Mr. Dalby? He has somewhat more experience with him than the other Starfleet officers, and he would have been made very familiar with the situation of the Maquis in general prior to his assignment to capture Chakotay and his crew. My point is that Tuvok should have been very well educated about the general situation and accustomed to dealing with Mr. Dalby in particular. This issue will continue to come up throughout the episode. The decision to have Mr. Tuvok train the out-of-line Maquis does make sense on its face, but does not stand up to a closer inspection. As Mr. Tuvok himself says in the episode, his method of teaching had proven successful for many years at Starfleet Academy. This fact explains a lot of Mr. Tuvok's behavior towards his trainees, especially in the beginning. What I cannot wrap my head around is the fact that Tuvok fails to adapt to the concept that he is not at Starfleet Academy in San Francisco on the paradise known as Earth. I just don't understand it. Mr. Tuvok is highly intelligent and very experienced, but none of this seems to come out in the episode. My own personal teaching and leadership experience suggests that the teacher who is unable to adjust their methods to the needs of their students isn't going to be very successful. Starfleet, being a military organization, obviously frowns upon flexibility, especially at Starfleet Academy. But this does not justify the less than adequate methods of Mr. Tuvok. I like the character of Tuvok in general, but the writing of this episode does it a disservice. The further I get into the episode, the more I find myself wondering who would have been a proper fit to teach these Maquis. Commander Chakotay himself is out because he has already earned their respect. The writers should honestly have left one or two gray-haired Starfleet people alive. Frankly, I can't think of any at all, except the original first officer. Feel free to educate me in the comments below. I'm glad they managed to slip in the part where Lieutenant Torres encourages Mr. Dalby. She does so in a provocative, Maquis way, and it makes me happy. It is never clearly explained how Mr. Tuvok convinces Mr. Dalby to play pool with him, but I suggest that Mr. Dalby did not join the game entirely willingly. This being the case, they started this game off completely on the wrong foot. I'm not sure how Mr. Tuvok should have gone about this, but it clearly does not go the way he had hoped. It bugs me that Mr. Neelix had to be the one to point Mr. Tuvok in a different direction, but this is in fact the case where Neelix isn't 99% annoying, so I guess that's a plus, sorta. Jumping back a bit, I did enjoy the scene where the doctor diagnoses the patient and cracks a joke or two. I enjoy his sense of humor, and it's good to see his character arc moving along. I dislike having to jump right back into Tuvok is annoying, but here we go. Mr. Tuvok's treatment of crewman Chell aggravates me. Why is Tuvok punishing Chell by having him use the wrong equipment for basic maintenance? What exactly possessed Tuvok to think that giving his cadets a Kobayashi Maru-like simulation would be helpful? I realize this isn't the exact simulation, but the basics are there. Starfleet calls this the no-win scenario for a reason. The only thing that makes this understandable is to chalk it up to bad writing. Onward and upward, then. Oh, right, we have to talk about the B-plot. In no universe does it make sense for Starfleet's newest and smartest ship to be crippled by cheese. There's a reference somewhere in the Next Generation era of Star Trek to the Enterprise being a self-cleaning ship. This was a number of in-universe years prior. You would think that Voyager was built to stand up to a little bacteria from time to time. Given the number of biological hazards faced by Starfleet over the last couple hundred years, cheese as a threat is completely absurd. Some may argue that these gel packs are brand new and experimental. I submit that it would be illogical for Starfleet to launch a risky experiment tied to every critical system on the ship without having an easy way to pull out the plug.
Its potential is a fact.
Frankly, the only fact that I'm concerned about is if this thing doesn't work, there are not enough men aboard to run the ship, and that's begging for trouble.
If this sort of technology was experimental, they would probably have sent Voyager somewhere closer to Earth, where there's always a few starships in easy reach if something should go wrong.
But we're the only ship in the quadrant.
I wish the writers had made more of an effort to identify the advantage provided by the gel packs. For the sake of this episode, I can accept that the gel packs are an annoyance. That being said, I dislike the gel packs in general because they're rarely shown to give Voyager an edge, especially in the first few seasons when all they face for enemies are a watered-down version of the Klingons. I'm not a big fan of the A-plot, B-plot interaction because I find the origins of the B-plot so nonsensical. However, I do appreciate the response of Mr. Tuvok and his quote-unquote trainees to the emergency. I enjoy the sequence right up to when Mr. Dalby says that because Mr. Tuvok took the risk to save the younger Maquis, the rest of them won't be any more trouble. I also don't recall seeing any of these trainees again, although I believe Mr. Chell is mentioned toward the end of Season 7. As I said before, I do give the writers credit for trying to do something with the Maquis in this episode. I mentioned earlier that this took the place of the 37s, which would have been a two-parter. I don't think Learning Curve would have worked as a two-parter. Instead, I would have extended the Maquis training elements of the episode at least a little bit. The way the episode is structured, it invites a suspenseful ending. The way the episode actually ends is like a giant neon sign saying, "That's all, folks." It's really annoying. Another annoying episode this one reminds me of is Good Shepherd, and I think it was Season 7 of Voyager. I was also annoyed by that episode, but it didn't bother me as much overall because Good Shepherd wasn't as critical to the arc of Voyager as a whole, in my opinion. We'll see what I think when I get around to covering that episode eventually. This is one of the clearest instances where the premise of Voyager is better suited for the longer form structure adopted by Deep Space Nine. This is especially true given the aforementioned fact that the Maquis were made for Voyager. This is one of the last times we'll hear from the Maquis, and I really don't like that. In fact, I wish Voyager as a whole had been given more room to flex and grow. We still did get a decent series. I hope you've enjoyed my thoughts on this episode. I always love a good discussion, so please feel free to comment below with your opinions. Thank you for watching.